This is Luke chapter 8 and verse 47 through to 55. When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And while he was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe, and she will be made well." When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the girl's father and mother. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her. But he said, "Stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. He, however, took her by the hand and called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up immediately, and he gave orders for something to be given her to eat. Her parents were amazed, but he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. It's a wonderful story. And this woman who had had the issue of blood, she'd been bleeding, she touched Jesus' garment, she was unclean, she touched Jesus. Now Jesus didn't become unclean, but she became clean and cleansed. And as this happens, as Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well, go in peace," somebody comes to Jairus and says, "Your daughter's dead, don't bother Jesus anymore." And sometimes we can get to the end of ourselves and think, well, this is beyond even divine intervention. But Jesus says, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe, and she will be made well." And so Jesus continues with Jairus to the house. In that moment, Jairus had a choice, I suppose. He could have said, "Leave me alone, Jesus. I need to go home and grieve for my daughter. I need to go home. I need to comfort my wife in our loss, in our bereavement. Don't come anymore." But Jesus says, "Don't be afraid, only believe." And Jesus went with Jairus back to the house, where everyone was weeping and lamenting and so forth. And as part of the Old Testament law, a dead body was something that was unclean. If you touched a dead body, you would become unclean. But now again, by the power of the holiness of the Lord Jesus, he touches this dead girl and he says, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up immediately, and he gave orders for something to be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed. Now, do you see something here? That in the first instance, the woman touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and she was healed, and she was cleansed. And here we have a dead body, and Jesus reaches out, and he touches the dead body. And the dead body becomes cleansed. It returns to life. This little girl returns to life. And so it is with the presence of the Lord Jesus. When we touch him, we become clean. When he touches us, we become clean. And how we need to touch and reach out and touch him and only believe, as Jesus said here. It's interesting, Jesus says to this woman, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And he says to Jairus, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be well." And Jesus raises up this little girl from the dead. It's interesting, he says, he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. Now everybody around would have known that she was sick unto death. And the parents would have seen that Jesus raised her from the dead. But he said, don't tell anybody. And sometimes there is a celebrity in being healed, and we need to be careful and protect people. We find later that Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, became of note, so that the authorities tried to murder him as well as Jesus. And perhaps Jesus was trying to protect this little girl from that celebrity of being the little girl that Jesus raised from the dead.